Okay, it's 9 o'clock, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I think everybody's here is going to be here, including those who are online. So this is Web Management Reports and Circulation Statistics. I'm Steve Heiser. I'm the Director of Milwaukee County Federated Library System. And can we just go around the room real quick and just introduce ourselves and where we're from?
I'm Erin. I'm the librarian of the lead worker for circulation and handling.
I'm John Gardner, the manager of Baby Library, just transferred from Washington.
I'm Emily Weiss. I'm the adult reference librarian at South Milwaukee.
Great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I know it's kind of early at 9 o'clock, but glad you're here. We're also streaming this live on YouTube, and this will be recorded, so if you have staff that need to look at this in the future, they can reference this, and it'll be on our YouTube channel, which is MCFLS1, and you can go to there, and we've got a bunch of stuff, mostly Sierra training and things like that. So yeah, the way it'll work today is if you are online, we will probably go straight through. I don't think we're going to have a break today because we're scheduled here from 9 to 11. I'm not sure if it's going to go quite that long depending on questions, but we'll try to handle those questions at the very end of the session for those of the folks that are online. So what I'd like to do is talk about web management reports here and what they are. So you should have some handouts. I'll reference those as we go along, and you'll need some. You'll need some reference as you go through here because it's kind of confusing in some ways. So web management reports is really the only way that you can analyze transaction-based information from Sierra. There's a couple new things that we've added, and I'll show you the dashboard at the very end. So most of you are probably aware of that already. Oops, don't need to do that. So what it does have is about 36 months or 3 years of circulation statistics available. And it's only the granularity is up to the month. So it's not a day-by-day statistics gathering, it's month to month. So the latest you could see right now would be, you could see up to the current month with some reports like February, but you can't go back like the last 2 weeks or something like that. I believe you can do yesterday, day before, and the day before that. But generally the chunks of reports that go back months and years, they're segmented usually by month. So you really can't go much farther back than that as far as granularity goes. The dashboard, you can go back a little bit further and really pick out certain days if you wanted to do that. So that's one of the big differences between web management reports and the dashboard that we offer now. So, and to add a little bit more confusion to the process, we have two interfaces for the reports. One is a spreadsheet interface, which we will talk about a little bit later, and the web browser interface that we're going to look at first. The web browser, I call them the old school and the new school. So you can kind of keep that straight. I'll probably be referring to both of those. So how does it differ? And I get some of these questions a lot. How does it differ from Sierra statistics? For those of you who are not familiar, Sierra statistics is a function within Sierra that allows you to get counts of records based on usually review files. And you can get counts of fixed field data like how many items have this call number, or how many items are of this format, that type of thing. So you can get that type of information pretty easily with the Sierra statistics module. It's great for counting stuff, but it's just not really useful for circulation. It does have a few item record fields related to circulation, but they're really not reliable outside of those 4 fields you see here on the screen. Last year's circ, year-to-date circ, total checkout, and total renew. And those are usually associated just with item record fields. So if you're doing an item record list, you can get some circ data regarding those fields. Year-to-date circ as the number of items the item has been checked out during the current year. So every January, I can actually turn the numbers over. So year-to-date circ becomes last year's circ, and we zero out year-to-date circ on January 1, so it's accurate. The one thing that I wanted to make sure you're aware of is that field only counts checkouts and not renewals. So year-to-date circ only counts checkouts. Same thing for last year's circ. The number of times the item was checked out during the last year, so 2017, those numbers are pretty accurate. But again, it's only checkouts and not renewals. So it doesn't give you the whole picture of circ with regard to those items, but it does get you in the ballpark. Total checkout is just, it's a number incremented by the system each time the item is checked out. So that's for the life of the item. And then total renew is the total number of items, the total number of times the item has been renewed. That just kind of goes without saying. It's for the life of the item, how many times it's been renewed. For our purposes and on our system, some Sierra or innovative systems do this differently, but we've combined in our circulation reports, checkouts and renewals into one number, at least for web management reports. With the dashboard, you can get a separate number for renewals and checkouts, so you can kind of separate those numbers out a bit. So it's a little bit more flexible that way. Okay. So here's an example of Sierra Statistics. And if you run a report within Sierra Statistics, you'll see something like a table like this. This is just looking at an item record list of about 2,100 items or so. And this is looking at a status report. It just kind of breaks down the items by status or status code. But for each one of these reports, it doesn't matter which report, like it could be format or I-type or whatever. It will always have those columns that you're looking at here, the total checkout, total renew, year-to-date circ, and last year's circ. So it's just, it's a nice feature that they offer Sierra Statistics with. But again, you can't really break it down past that. So and you have to remember those numbers aren't, particularly for year-to-date circ and last year's circ, don't include renewals. So they're a little bit limited in that regard. Let's see here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the old school edition of Web Management Reports. It's had a long and troubled history. The way that this works is that it displays information in tables and charts on the screen. It's available at this URL here. I know some people like to bookmark. There's this long URL that's used for web management reports, but all you have to do is type in that, and that's a shortcut to the old school edition of Web Management Reports. And that will get you, let's see if I can find it here. So that will get you this screen right here. You can see up at the very top of the screen that there's a port number and all this other stuff, but all you have to do is put /manage and you will get to the screen all the time. So the reason I referred to the fact that it has a long and troubled history is that for the longest time it was dependent upon Java for the menu system, and that no longer is the case, although it still does not function in Chrome for whatever reason. So Firefox and Internet Explorer are your best options right now. I'm going to be demonstrating the reports section here using Firefox, and that's what I would recommend if you have access to that. But any of the Internet Explorer browsers, I think it's Edge and Internet Explorer will work as well. And let's see, I think that's all I wanted to say about that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the layout of the Web Management Reports interface. So I'm going to bring up some of the handouts here so people on the stream can see this too. So This would be under, I believe, Toolbar. And we'll just walk through these very quickly. These should be one of your handouts. So the toolbar for the web management reports, which is at the top of the screen, all the reports initially have a table format, meaning they have rows and columns. If there's a report available that has another format, like a pie chart or something like that, those will appear there as well, in addition to the table format. But the table format's the default, and that's what most people end up using anyway. You can choose the help option to display information about using the reports, and it really depends on the report selected from the menu. So if you're in the all activity report, you may get a different set of help instructions than say something else. The options below here appear for some reports, but not all. So the one directly beneath that with all the different versions of the charts, it says choose the all option to display the current report data in all three formats: table, pie chart, bar graph, and the report frame. So yeah, when you do that, your data is going to appear in three areas on the screen. It's not very popular, but you can still use it. Depends on what type of data. If you're looking at some very simple data, it might be useful enough to display all three charts at one time. Below that, you can choose the bar graph option, so it's kind of like a graph option. And it's interesting that they've chosen some of these options to include into the new school edition. In that case, what they did is they pulled it all into a spreadsheet rather than put it onto a screen. It's a little different that way. One of the more important ones that you'll come across is this download option. So what happens is when you see the information displayed on your screen and you see this button, you're able to download the report data to a text file to your PC. And they're bar delimited so that all the content is separated by the bar symbol, which is the up and down, or what you call it. Yeah, the bar symbol. And that allows you to use this within Excel. So you can pull it into Excel, use the bar symbol as your delimiter, and then you can start working with it in Excel. So it's useful to do it that way. The pie chart is pretty straightforward. That's just another version here. So you've got the table, the bar graph, and the pie chart as your options to view the data. The percent tool we don't use quite as often. This is for mostly like fund reports that I know the MPL selectors use. They can get that type of information using that button. And probably the most important one, at least in my mind, is this up and down arrow you see at the bottom of the screen, or the bottom of the page here. That's very useful when it comes to dealing with the all activity report and the hourly report, because you have to scroll up and down using those arrows to get to the next statistical group, which we'll talk about here in a second. So down below here is just, I know this is hard for you to see online, but you can see where the menu is here off on the bottom on your screen, and then the toolbar, where all those buttons are located generally. And then the report area is where all the data gets filled in. Okay.
Is this Google Drive available to us?
Yeah, I can get that to you. I'll have to share it, but I don't have it right now.
Oh.
I have to do that for the whole thing too. Okay. So I'll go back here. So the way it works is, outside of the buttons and everything that we've talked about so far, you can see the toolbar at the top of the screen. The reports generally work like a flow chart. So each selection you make influences the next set of buttons that are available to you. So for example, if we start out here, generally everyone is going to be interested in circ activity. So for under circulation, you want to choose circ activity. You want to log in. using your Sierra login and password. Mine is just Heezer, but it would be like Cent or Whitefish Bay or whatever. You're using your personal Sierra login to get access, and everybody should have access to this. So, for example, if I choose the all activity report and just run it, I can choose to limit by a certain area instead of just the defaults here by terminal. And then all those buttons below here are then now populated below. I have other options now since I've chosen limit. The same goes for something like the hourly report, which is another popular report. If I choose that, then everything kind of folds up. So it's whatever selection you choose here at the very top tends to influence what options you have below. And then some options may also appear in the report frame, so this area, depending on what you're choosing. For example, the owning home report, which is the basis for all of reciprocal borrowing numbers, is available here. There's really nothing here, but as soon as I click on submit, then I have more options here available within the report frame itself, including using total circulation or net circulation, the starting and ending month. So there are other options that do appear within the report frame depending on what type of report you're running. Okay. The other thing that is useful to know is that there is a button down here called Remove Existing Tables. So as you work with these circulation activity reports, they do retain files. So there's like a cache of some of these reports. And on occasion, you may want to just remove whatever's there sitting in the cache. It doesn't really hurt anything, and it may clear things up. So if you're having problems running a report or getting the data to refresh properly, use Remove Existing Tables, and that will clear things up a bit. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to look at are some of these, the popular canned reports. And probably the most useful report, or one of them, is the all activity report. And to make use of this report, what you have to do is understand terminal groups. And the last attachment I just gave you before I walked in has a list of all the statistical groups assigned to areas of each library. So let me bring that up for the folks online. Maybe I have to go here. Okay, well, I guess that's not going to work, but let's see if I can get it work with this here. Okay. Anyway, so I can get we'll just talk this through so you understand how these work. Generally, every library location within MCFLS has two statistical groups assigned to it. One ending in a number 1 and the other one ending in a number 2. So if you look at the screen here, you can kind of get the sense of this. There's a couple of exceptions, and I'll talk about them. Anything ending in a 1 is a self-check or automated handler system. So your self-check machines, your automated handling machines are in that group. So let's just take East Library, for example, from MPL. Their statistical group is 131 and 132. So all their self-check and automated material handling is handled in stat group 131. Anything regarding a Sierra desktop is grouped together in 132. So it doesn't matter if you're at the circ desk, at the reference desk, if you're using any kind of circulation or doing any kind of circulation regarding Sierra, using the Sierra desktop client, it'll come up in 132 if you're at East. And this is all because you're logins are assigned these statistical groups when we set them up. For South Milwaukee, there's one exception. They don't have a self-check machine or materials handling. So they only have the one stack group, which is 122. Central has a number of statistical groups assigned to them. Generally, their self-checks are 111. The desktop client is 112. 115 is drive up. And then they also have 116, which isn't displayed here, but I believe that's tech services and processing. They do check-in materials so that they're trapped for holds and then sent out in delivery to the location so they're ready to be processed when they get there. But generally, every location in the system has two stack groups assigned to it. And you really need to know that in order to make this report make any sense. So if we use the all activity report, let's just use that as our example here. It's set up right now as a default for yesterday, but if we just say we'll go with month to date, so all of February month of this month, and we sort by terminal, which is the default here. We'll just use that as our example, and we click on submit. You'll see this status button appear for a lot of these reports, and it just means it's working in the background. You don't have to worry or anything like that, but what you do need to do, what I usually do is pay attention to, is the clock or the little hourglass, I don't know what you want to call it, the little spinning thing still working. If it doesn't, if it's not spinning anymore, that's usually an indication that you can hit status and it'll the report will appear on the screen. So that in that case, that's true. So this is circulation activity by terminal. By terminal, they mean these statistical groups. You'll see terminal come up. It's really old school verbiage when some of you maybe remember, we used to have blue screen terminals. And they were actually hardwired terminals to the internet, or the network. And we used to have these little terminals servers that you would hook into, and it would just be a dumb terminal, and that's how you would get your statistical information. So you would check out on these Anzio terminals, and it was a trip. A lot of people loved them, so when we got rid of them, it was not a happy time. But so I want to give you an idea of what this report looks like. And it's really important. Probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you right now is this report, unlike some other reports we're going to look at, measures circuit items running across your desk or your self-check terminal. So it doesn't matter who owns them, but as long as they're running across your Sierra desktop or your self-check at your library, they're counted here. So you could have Shorewood items running through East, and they're going to be part of that 12,000 total that they have for their self-checks. Could be on like a hold shelf, and they're just checking them out there. And that's most likely what's going to happen. So the most common question I have is, why doesn't my checkout report match the all activity report? And the answer is that they're counting two separate things. And we'll talk about the checkout report here in a sec. Okay, so just to give you an example here, for month to date, let's see if I can get you a good example. Okay, let's look at Zablocki, for example. They are 191 and 192. You'll notice that they don't have any check-ins for 191. It's all checkouts, and it's because they don't have an automated materials handler or sorting machine taking in check-ins. So all of their statistics, that's 7,828, is all checkouts from their self-checkout machines. And then 192 is all their desktop activity. So 3,200 checkouts for the month and 8,744 check-ins. So they're doing that all on Sierra desktop clients. Some libraries, for example, East, have the automated material handlers, and that 10,000 number that they have for 131 there indicates all those check-ins being processed by that sorting machine coming through. So it gives you an idea of some of the numbers that you're dealing with, and it could, give you some indication of trends that's happening throughout the system or just at your library. Most folks aren't really interested in how the system's doing. It's mostly how your library is doing and what your trends are in terms of checkouts, check-ins, and so forth. The holds that you see there you'll notice that there are zeros by most of the self-check numbers because they just don't handle them. But all those holds you see there are holds processed or placed by the Sierra desktop clients. And then we don't use that other column for hold recall. It's just not, that's usually an academic library process where you can actually put a hold on something or recall it after a certain point in time, but we just don't use it within our system. You'll see a couple there, but it's not used. Those are usually in error. So, but this gives you an idea of like a total picture of circulation activity by terminal by those stat groups. And that's what most people use to get their circ stats for the month.
So can I ask a question?
Sure, sure.
So if I'm looking at 122, which is South Milwaukee.
Right.
So that means for the month of January?
Yeah, this is February 1st through the 20th. You can see at the very top, they usually put the dates in.
Oh, okay. So just for like the first 3 weeks of February.
Right, exactly.
There was 7,000 check-ins.
Right, right.
Okay. And then there was about 16,000 swipes total.
Right, 16,000, yeah, all activity as a whole, like transactions, I guess you could consider that number.
Okay.
Yeah, as a whole. Does that make sense? There's a lot more you can do with this report. You can use the terminal. There's a bunch of things. First of all, if we just stick with all activity, you choose your date range. We can leave it as month to date. You can use the limit option below here. So the default is to sort by these terminal statistical groups, but you could also sort by item location, by the hour, which I usually don't use because we're going to use the hourly report here in a second. But you can limit to specific terminals. Like if you didn't want to look at the entire group here, you could limit it by a specific terminal group, item location, or hour. So if we choose terminal, it's going to prompt us during the process here to choose the terminal that we want to use. But then you can actually have your report output numbers by p-type or any of these. The first half or so up to residents here are patron record fields. And then below here are agency, I-level. All these are item record fields. So you can choose what type of output you'd want. We'll just leave it at p-type just to show you what's available. So if we click submit here, it's going to prompt me to display or pick one or more terminals that we want to look at. So if we wanted to look at just East, which is use them as an example, and we click on submit query, gives us our status. You can see it kind of moved really quickly at the very top there. Okay, so this is a report by p-type for just East, and it's not their items, it's the items running across their desk. So if that gives you an idea of who is using your library, this gives you some kind of idea of who's doing it. As you would imagine, many of them are Milwaukee p-types, but you can kind of get a picture of who is using your library just by using this report and limiting it to p-type. And that's not something you'd be able to get through the general report. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. The other report I wanted to, or kind of the opposite or complementary report that you could use is the checkout report. So if we click on that, everything kind of resets here. So I'm going to use the checkout report. use month to date. And we'll just use the system as the basis here. And this will give us a P-type report, and we'll run that, and we'll just show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is a circulation statistics or checkout report for all locations throughout the system, and it's broken down by patron type. This is very helpful because the difference between all activity and checkout is checkout reports will give you how your collection is doing rather than your circulation terminals, like what's running across your desk. This can actually show you how your collection is doing across the system. So this isn't very helpful here. So if I was to actually run this report, I'd choose one specific location. So if I wanted to do one only, I could pull out one location within the system and find out how their circulation is doing. We can just limit it to P-type. And when you do that, it prompts you for a list to choose one location that you can look at. So if you wanted to look at South Milwaukee Circ and how your collection Circ was doing, you could choose that or any location within the system and then click on Submit. And this is just looking at South Milwaukee Collection Circ, how your collection is doing across the system. They could be in delivery and transit, being checked out at other locations, not just South Milwaukee location, but it's your collection. How is it doing across the system? And this is who is checking out your materials. As you go down the list here, you can see South Milwaukee has a great deal of Circ here for those particular patrons assigned to you, so adults, children, staff. That's 50% of your Circ is going to that group of patrons. So if you want to add it up, it's like what, generally like 56, maybe 57, 58% of your Circ is going directly to your patrons. And the rest is going beyond South Milwaukee and being circulated to other patrons of other communities. So adult Milwaukee makes up 10%, as you might imagine, just because of the numbers related to population. So it makes sense that that would be happening. Does that make sense? So all activity gives you what's running across your desk. Checkout gives you information about your circulation, your collection, and how your collection is doing. Another report I wanted to point out to you, I guess before we move on to that, I wanted to make sure you're aware that not only can you choose one only, but you can do separate. So these collections can be separate in the same report. So let's just do that just to show you what that looks like. So it's looking at the entire circulation for all collections within the system, South Milwaukee, Central, Washington Park, or what have you. So if we click on that one, so let's see, what am I looking at here? Oh, okay. So this is MPL Central 1, and since there's really not anything associated with those, there's no real collections associated with that particular group. I think it's a locate. Let's just take a look at the next one here. Okay. So this is actually a report broken down by collection or item location. So this Central Adult 1A, you can actually hit this arrow, and this is what I was doing. This is an example of using those arrows to get to the next report. You can actually see how your collection is doing just going down the list here, and it's going to split out your collection circulation by item. So it's pretty actually interesting to see this. So we could go all day and we'll hit like, 800 to 1,000 item locations. But what you could do is if you're at a branch or at a suburban library, and you wanted to see how your collection was doing during a certain time range, this is just month to date. If I were a branch or suburban library in particular, I would probably do this report for a year, or say, like a certain large amount of time to see how that collection circ is doing. Does that make sense? So there's a number of options and reports you can run through here. It's pretty neat. And this, as compared to the New School edition of these reports I'm going to show you, is much more full-featured. It has all the reports. So this interface has a lot more of these options than, say, the new one does.
Is there a way to use this to run a report to, say, all of my adult items at South Milwaukee 12A? Let's
Sure.
say I have 40,000 items.
Right.
What percentage of them actually circulated in the past year?
That's a great question. I think you could do that. What I would probably do first is look at that last year's circ report and just actually probably run Sierra statistics for something like that. So you could pull all your items that you're looking for, like 12A, and then run a statistical report, and you can actually see some of the data for that. The other thing in this case, you probably, if you're looking for like specific items that have not circed, you could use that 5-year no circ report and just move the dates up so it's just looking at 1 year and just look at your items. If you're interested in doing that, we could probably get that report for you. I know some libraries do a 3-year no circ versus a 5 to do weeding and things like that. So that's not out of the ordinary to do something like that. Okay, so the next report I wanted to show you was the filled report. And what this report shows you is a detailed analysis of filled hold activity. Hold is filled when an item requested by a patron is checked out to that patron. That's another report we do have in the dashboard, but it's also available here. So these are filled holds. So if we look at month to date, filled holds, we'll look at the system, and we'll just use the p-type as the generic one. So as of for the month, and this is a p-type. The reason this p-type list is sorted the way it is that it's all sorted by p-type number. So adult Milwaukee is 0, child Milwaukee is 1, and it just goes on down the list. And if you see blank spaces, it usually means there's some kind of coding error. So somebody should be coded, like they're using a number that's just not in use. And it's probably just some kind of coding error. But that's the reason it's sorted this way. So I don't think you can sort these numbers like, say, you wanted the highest percentage at the top. What you could do, though, is use the download button up here, download it to Excel, and then do your sorting there, which is probably a better way to do it, handle it anyway. So this is a number of filled holds by p-type for the entire system. You can do one only. So if you wanted to look at, and this is just looking at collection, it's not like your location. So if we wanted to choose just South Milwaukee again, to just look at that location. So this is how your collection is being filled as far as holds go, like who is requesting your items and then actually checking them out for your collection, not your location, not your whole pickup location, but your collection. So it's a little confusing to try to deal with that. But 22% of your collection is being requested and filled by adult Milwaukee patrons. If we go down the list here, it's 12.9% for adult at South Milwaukee. So again, you could probably export this to, on senior Milwaukee makes up 10%. So it gets you, idea of who is actually using your collection, who's requesting it, and you may be able to do some more selecting based on some of these numbers. So if you know that you have a large majority of your collection is being circulated by seniors, for example, you may want to just maybe do some programming or use this data to kind of inform how you're doing your selection of materials as well. And you can do that for the other CIRC reports. The other report that I use, or I know a lot of our libraries use on occasion, is this hourly report. And this is fantastic. I really love this one. It gives me a lot of information. There's only 2 options here, so there's really not a whole lot you need to worry about in terms of choosing an option. It's either items or patrons, and it's almost always items. What this will do is it's kind of the all activity report, except it's hourly. So it's showing your CIRC desk activity by hour and by day. So let's take a look, and it's great for a number of reasons. So in this case, as you can see, again, we have this kind of month. You can only choose 1 month at a time, so let's just choose the most current month, February 2018. As you notice, you can't pick a day or like a range of days, like cross months, so it's a little limiting that way. Okay, so this is the items checked out, and as you can imagine, pay attention to the fact that these are using those stack group numbers again. So this is 1001, which is the Franklin self-check group. And it shows you how their self-checks are being used throughout February. So day of the month, a column along the left-hand side here, and then the times along the top. And that's just their self-check and how they're being used throughout the day. Down below, you have the total by day of week and the times of the day that they're being used here. Now, to see your statistical group, you have to use these arrows, and that's where most people have trouble. They forget that this isn't just the one report. You have to go down and use these arrows. So if I wanted to go see 1002, which is their Sierra desktop CIRC, they have to use that arrow to go down. But as you can imagine, this would be really useful for staffing and trying to schedule staff. If you're busy at certain times of the day, you could schedule staff to cover those times if you're seeing trends, I think. So, in my case, what I would probably do is if I was at a branch or suburban library, even central, I'm sure they do this now, they'll look at some of these trends over the past, say, year or so and say, okay, we don't need 2 people at this time of the day. Let's schedule someone in. But you may not have any say in that matter anyway. But, I'm sure the directors are looking at some of this stuff as well. But it's a great report to determine your staffing levels and what you need to do for that, and just seeing trends. Okay, and the last canned report I wanted to look at was the owning home report. Actually, there's 2 of them, owning home and non-owned. So in order for you to actually view these reports, there's really no options here. The options will appear in the frame once we choose owning home and click submit. So again, these are the options we showed before. First of all, the owning home report, you have a handout that kind of gives you a little bit of a lay of the land. And I'll see if I can bring this up here. Oops. Okay. So we'll try to flip back and forth between these 2. But probably the most asked question I get is, how the hell do I read this thing? It's not very easy to figure out what you're looking at. But let's go ahead and run a report. I just want to give you some of the options, and then we'll kind of go back and forth between these two. Okay. So if you run these reports often enough, you'll see the differences between these top two, total circulation and net circulation. The owning home report is used mostly in our system. It was developed by our system with the help of Innovative. We actually paid them money to develop this report specifically for reciprocal borrowing. So the borrowing that occurs between municipalities, the basis for the money that we dispense for reciprocal borrowing is based on this report, and we had to put it together basically. And it's now part of Innovative's, or at least at one point it was, Consortium Management Extensions. So it was a report that they developed with our help, and then they marketed it to other libraries. So it's kind of cool in that way. So total circulation, what you'll see is that there are columns for the patron's home library will be in the columns, and then the owning library will be in the rows. And you can choose this to show total circulation, and we'll run both reports so you can see what I'm talking about, and net circulation. So the net circulation will show like a plus minus, so you might see a minus net circulation if a borrowing library is in the red as opposed to how much they borrow versus lend. So if they borrow more than they actually lend out, they will have a negative number associated with their library, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You can also include have statistics on the number of items patrons borrow from their own library included or not. By default, they're not. And for our reciprocal borrowing reports, it makes no sense to include them, so that you'll see zeros kind of diagonally as you go down the list. But you can choose a starting and ending month. So if you wanted to do all of January of 2017, you can do January 2017 through December, if that's what you want to do. For our reciprocal borrowing reports, I believe it's October through September. And there's a whole formula that we use for that, but it's usually those months. For our purposes, we'll just look at the current month, to give you an idea what these look like. So our current month, we'll leave it at total circulation and just give you an idea what these look like. So the longer your time frame is, the longer these reports tend to run. So just be mindful of that. It may take a couple of minutes for them to actually run. This one should be pretty easy. So determining how to read this. If you look at your handout, we'll go back here. Oops. So the patron's home library is indicated by the columns. So and that's indicated in the patron record by the residence field. So if your residence field is 1, you are a resident of Milwaukee, and so on and so forth. No other field actually informs that. It's just the residence field within the patron record. The owning library is indicated in the rows going across. So, and that is indicated by the region field. So the region field in the item record indicates ownership. So in this case, if you want to look at this example, there were 3 East patrons, let's just say use East being like a residence field, that checked out, or I'm sorry, 3 items were checked out by East patrons that belong to Maine. Does that make sense? I think I actually have to have this in front of me reading this report every time, because even I get confused, and this is like almost 13 years plus looking at this report, so it's very confusing. It shouldn't be, because the owning library is at the very top of the column, but it's very easy to get confused with this. And then using this formula again, you could see that 10 items from Maine patrons or associated with main patrons or checked out that belong to North. Does that make sense? It's not a report you're going to use very often, and it's mostly used for administrative types like me, but it is useful to see how your collection is being circulated and who is circulating, you know, taking your items basically. So if we go back to the report, this is just the owning home report. The non-owned is a completely different animal.
Is there some sort of list, like which libraries would fall under main?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, this is just an example. This is kind of like the innovative example of how that looks. If we go back to the actual report, these numbers at the top indicate municipalities. So 1 and 10, you know, 1 being MPL, all of Milwaukee, 10 being Franklin, 12 South Milwaukee, so on and so forth. So if you look at these are the total numbers. These aren't the net numbers. As you can see those zeros running down diagonally because we didn't count circulation by a patron's own municipality. So those numbers, if they borrow from their own, like Milwaukee patrons borrowing from Milwaukee items, those aren't included. They're just not, and they're not useful for things like this, for the reciprocal borrowing end. So you can use this as an example. If we just use that first number, 2,776 Franklin items were checked out by Milwaukee patrons. Does that make sense? So that first number, second second row, that first number underneath Milwaukee, at 2,776 Franklin items checked out by Milwaukee patrons. And you can just use that formula all the way down the list. So that's the total number for this month. Where you see blank codes down the right and bottom numbers generally indicates laptops or laptop checkouts. Because they're circulated in-house, they're not counted as part of this report. They're eliminated. So hopefully that makes a little sense. You know, and I was mistaken before when I meant that I told you that the item ownership is determined by the region field. It's not. There is a separate table for our link maintenance that we have to update every time that we add another location. That's where this information is coming from. So it's a table that really nobody has access to except me when I actually create the item. And if you add another South Milwaukee item, you have to add that location to their link maintenance table, and it's associated with their location. So my apologies for that. This gets confusing for me too. But it's pretty solid. The residence fields are always going to be locked up in line with the patron record, and those link maintenance tables always have to be filled in. If they're not, then actually we'll bring down the system, which happened to me about a year ago when I forgot to put in had a ton of item locations to put in, and it did not like it. So if you don't do it accurately, it really comes back. So this is pretty accurate, and these are accurate numbers and locations assigned. So let's recalculate. I'm going to show you the other version of this, which is, and sometimes you have to kind of go back and forth between reports to get them to line up correctly. So I'm going to do this. We'll do net circulation and just show you the same time span. So this current month, but looking at net circulation. Okay, and again, it should be pretty quick. So you'll notice that now you have negative numbers assigned to some library locations. So you can see at the top, and this is why we have reciprocal borrowing, is negative numbers assigned, negative balances assigned to some libraries within the system. It's not just Milwaukee. You'll see that, for example, North Shore is in a negative balance, so their patrons are borrowing from other libraries more than they're lending out. That's what that negative number essentially means. And the numbers change, you know, for each month as we go along. But so, for example, North Shore has a negative reciprocal borrowing balance with Milwaukee. So they borrowed 328 more, their patrons borrowed, well, no, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. Milwaukee patrons borrowed more North Shore items than Milwaukee actually lent out to North Shore. Does that make sense?
Say that again.
Sorry, I confused it. So if you look at the North Shore total there, it's
What's North Shore number?
yes, 8, I'm sorry, yeah, number 8. So that's, yeah, negative 328. So Milwaukee, in this case, Milwaukee patrons borrowed more from North Shore than Milwaukee provided to North Shore patrons. So that balance between the two was negative in favor of North Shore. So North Shore, I think that's what's going on here. But generally speaking, you can see that total at the very end there for Milwaukee indicates that they were in the negative as opposed to the other libraries within the system. And that's where we get some of these reciprocal borrowing issues that come up from time to time. And that's what it's based on.
So for that first row for Milwaukee, it's showing that there's a whole lot more items that it's sending out to other libraries than the other libraries coming to Milwaukee.
Yeah, well, in this case, you know, for example, let's look at Franklin again. So Franklin has, you can see the negative number matches exactly the positive number that they have. So, yeah, this gets a little bit complicated. But Franklin is in the positive when it comes to their relationship with Milwaukee in terms of lending. So they're lending out more to Milwaukee than Milwaukee is lending to them. So you can see those numbers all have positive and negative partners throughout the chart. And you can see in the case of Wauwatosa and West Dallas, those negative numbers are fairly significant. And
The numbers for Wauwatosa.
yeah, so Wauwatosa is 34, West Dallas is 36. And so Milwaukee's in the negative by 10,976 as compared to Wauwatosa. So what that basically means is Milwaukee patrons are going in and borrowing more from Wauwatosa. So, you know, and it has a lot to do with geography. There may be a lot of people living on that border between Milwaukee and Wauwatosa that are residents of Milwaukee and using their library. That's kind of a reflection of what that shows there. Same for West Dallas, but to a lesser extent. And again, this is not a report you're generally going to run, but I feel compelled to show it to you in case you have questions about it, because that is one report that I get questions about from directors especially. The other report is not used for reciprocal borrowing purposes. It's more of a delivery report. And this is called the non-owned report. And again, it's got one option. You choose your date, start in any month. And in this case, it's a little different in terms of the numbers you'll see in the columns. Make sure I got everything. So this is the opposite side of your handout for the Consortium Reports. So as you can see, this table is much larger, and it's because whereas the Owning Home Report had all of Milwaukee grouped underneath one, every single location is represented in this group. And this just shows you non-owned items circulated and where they were circulated. So this is like, if you look at the legend here to try to figure out how to read this, I'll go back here. So for the non-owned report, the circulating library is represented in the rows and the owning library in the columns. So there is no patron information represented on this report. It's simply who owns the item and where was it circulated. So in this case, if you use an example again, we'll use another one. Use that first column for Maine. So 19 owned items by Maine were circulated at West. The real reason I've always referred to this, and directors before me have referred to this as a delivery report. So it shows you how much of this stuff is being sent into delivery, mostly to fill holds, is the guess, or it's being it's being transported to a library, circulated there. So it's mostly like a holds report, like where are these things being circulated, and it gives you a system overview in one table of how these things look.
So Patricia, what would the difference be between this and the field report then?
I think the field report, doesn't give you the system overview that this does. It's a little easier, I think, to get the numbers off of this, particularly for like a long span of time. I was thinking about that too as soon as I opened my mouth. It's not always holds, but it's most of it is it's measuring how much of your collection is going through delivery. That's mostly what you're seeing here. And for the most part, that's always going to be holds. You know, if your stuff is going to a library and then circulating from that library, most likely it's going to be, you know, holds related or something like that. So, and again, that's not a report we use for any kind of financial payouts or anything like that. It's just more informational. So if we use this example here again, this is the column that represents Center Street owned items. So in this case, 73 owned items by Center Street were circulated at Central, okay, for this time period. And 484 Central items were circulated at Franklin. Okay. And again, these blank codes are generally laptops, or there could be also miscoding going on for blank codes, but generally almost every item is represented here on this page.
I suppose the field holds might be kind of different because I could be from South Milwaukee and request something, I pick it up at Whitefish Bay, but it didn't necessarily get sent to South Milwaukee.
Right. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so that's really the canned reports that I wanted to cover. The other report, and we actually have to back out here a bit. So this is using the old school version here. You can click on reports to back out past the circ reports and get back to the main menu here. There is another circulation report called Crosstab that I don't use very often, but I feel compelled to talk about it because it can be useful and get you information you may not be able to get elsewhere. They are more flexible, but they are lengthy. They take a long time to run. So just be aware of that when you run these things. We may not be able to actually run one, but I'll show you how to get started with it. So Instead of Circ Activity here, you want to click on Crosstab. And again, put in your Sierra login. Okay. So you can run a number of reports off of this area. You can do a circulation crosstab. You can choose the report. Generally, people are interested in checkout statistics of a crosstab. You choose your date range. So we could use yesterday, month to date, year to date, whatever you decide you want to do. And you can limit by terminal group. So if you just wanted to look at one particular terminal group, you could do that. And that would, again, be circulation across your desk or whatever terminal group you decide to use. But what's really nice here is you can use these rows, a combination of rows and columns to build your own report. So if you wanted and I was trying to figure out the reason I ran this report, but you could run a item loc by item type report very easily here, and this would take forever, so I wouldn't recommend doing it right now. But you could have your item, let's see, what would be the most, usually you want to put your longest list of possible output in the rows, so your item locs are probably going to be that. And then your item types, or items, let's just say item level, or something like that. We'll just use item type. And you can get a complete picture of the system circulation by item loc in the rows and item type in the columns. And you could get a really good picture of Circ for that particular period. This comes in handy when none of these other reports work, which is very possible. So just wanted to show you that. I'm not going to be able to run it because I just think it's going to take too long for us to be able to do that. But it is available to you if you want to do that. Okay, and I'm going to go back and we're going to talk a little bit about exporting. So if we go back to Circ Activity, I'm already logged in, so I don't have to do it again. Let's just do an all activity report from yesterday and sort it by terminal. So again, you have, we can go over these buttons here at the top, just kind of review. The default is table. You have options for the pie chart. It's not very useful. But you can see the large players here are terminal 341, 361. Bar graph. And you'll notice when we look at the new school version of these reports, some of this stuff is available within that version, especially this all activity report. We can look at all of them together. Again, not very helpful. It does use frames, so like really old school web stuff. No divs here, just frames, if you're familiar with web development. And then the last one obviously is this download. So if we click on download, it's going to prompt me to, it always names it download as the file name. But you can, I believe you can rename it, but if you click on save file, and click on OK, excuse me. Hopefully it should appear somewhere. Yeah, that's true. So I'm guessing it's probably in the downloads area. We can just do modified here. Or it might be desktop. All right, well, let's do that again. Oh, I think it's probably, we can just do Notepad. Actually, that might be useful. Okay, where are you? Let's go here. Maybe this is the problem.
Maybe you have to go into Notepad, into the application design.
Possibly, I guess we can bring it up. I think it has more to do with the fact that these files are being saved in a directory that I'm not aware of, because I just downloaded Firefox today. So let's, oh boy. Well, I tell you what, why don't we, I was going to take a break anyway, because I need to get some water. But why don't we do that, and we'll meet here, and I'll figure this out in the meantime. Let's meet back here about 10 after, and we shouldn't have too much more to go over today, but, I'm sorry, 20 after.
20 after, okay.
Okay. Trouble with the clock reading today. All right, we're going to take a break here. There we go, options, okay. There we go.
master for all the buildings in
Yeah, M2 is usually the one that we use for most everything. I think that'll open up just about every room in the building.
Okay, yeah, I didn't think of that.
I'm trying to remember.
I had to bring the button and bother you.
Right, oh yeah, no worries. We get that a lot.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started again and move forward with just this download process. I was able to figure that out within 2 seconds of going into break. So hopefully this should work. So again, if you wanted to, we've got a simple circ activity report just from yesterday. And again, these reports basically accumulate at midnight or a little bit after each day. So can't really get stuff the day of. So if you want to get statistics for today, you generally have to wait until the next morning to get that information out. But if we wanted to download here, we would just click on this download button up at the top. In our case, we're just going to click on Save File, and it should prompt me for an area to save it. And I've already done so here, so I'm just going to call this Download 2. Okay, and there's one of two ways you can go about doing, getting the information into Excel. Generally, the way I do it is open up Excel first, and then create a new workbook. So that it should look something like this. And then the process is to go to the data area or data section. Click on that at the very top. And then click on From Text, because what you're dealing with is essentially a text file, delimited text file. So if we click on that, then you can choose the location where your file is located. In this case, it's in the Downloads area. And because I didn't really give it an extension, it doesn't know what file type it is. So if it's a TXT file, it's probably fine. It'll find it immediately, but you may have to choose all files. And then that's where you're going to be able to see your file appear here. So it just says File. And then you just click on Import. And then the import wizard for Excel will jump in, and you can see our raw data is all separated by these bar symbols. So that's how the columns are going to be basically set up. So you click on, make sure delimited is selected here. Click on Next. By default, the tab delimiter is selected, but you have the option to choose Other, and that's where you would put in your bar symbol. And you'll notice as soon as I hit that symbol, all the data is going to line up pretty well. So now it's all in these nice columns for the most part.
And by the bar symbol, you just mean that straight up and down line?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
It's right above the Enter key on the keyboard. And then you really don't have to do too much else after this. You could kind of mess around with some of the other options here, but then you can just click on Finish. Use the existing worksheet. It's going to use cell A1 as your starting point, but you can say I want to use C5 or something like that, and you can determine that there. Just click on OK, and then everything should line up. And then what I usually do is just move this over so it looks nice. But this is again, your circulation activity by terminal for yesterday. And if I was to get really fancy with this, I'd probably maybe delete this and then sort this by percentage. I guess you could go up at the top here and do a home. Go to sort filter, set largest to smallest, And it's always going to say expand the selection. You always say that because it's otherwise it'll just sort that column and nothing else.
I always just choose everything I want to sort.
Yeah,
That
there's
way too, okay.
there's two ways to do it, but yeah, you're probably doing it the safe way, which is probably the smart way. You click on sort, and then your total is going to appear at the top, but everything else will line up. So if we just deleted that, that would give you an idea of the circulation activity and who was doing the most for this time period, which was just yesterday. So 0 indicates the Webpack. So that stack group is always going to be indicated by 0. So you can see there's no checkouts, no check-ins, but there's almost 3,500 holds were placed yesterday using the Webpack. That means Encore or the Classic Catalog. And that's 8.2% of the total and down the line. So Wauwatosa self-check was second, West Allis self-check was third, and this is just total. So if we wiped out, the first one, just kind of didn't really consider holds as part of the formula, then Wauwatosa and West Allis were 1, 2, and then East was third. So I can see the volume that they're dealing with, and most everyone's in that kind of like 1 to 4% range, it seems like, of total activity. So just gives you an idea of what you can do and how you can just use Excel to work with the numbers a little bit more.
Will this be able to tell you how many polls were canceled through level as well?
No, it's just the ones that were placed. Yeah, we don't have that information. Yeah, I don't actually have access to that. That's one of the things they've been promising us for a while, is better holds information through SQL, through the database. It's supposed to be coming. I know that we are getting fines paid information into SQL, and that a lot of people have been talking about that recently with Sierra 3.4, which we'll probably go to. I'm going to wait till my replacement comes in for the LSA position before we do any upgrades, but that's something that we'll have to go to pretty soon after that. So like mid-year at the latest. Okay, so that's just an indication of what you can do with the download function. That's like really old school in terms of downloading a file, getting it into Excel, doing the import wizard. It's very 1999, and that's kind of, and there's nothing wrong with that. It works just fine. It just takes a few more steps. The new school version is a lot more streamlined in terms of how it works. So let's jump over to that. That's a segue. Let's see. Let's go to our PowerPoints so we make sure we're covering everything here. Okay, so the old school edition. Okay, so we talked about outputting the data to Excel. The new school edition, a lot of these requirements are just out of date because it's been so long since it's been out there. Excel 2000 or later, I think we're okay. Firefox 2 Plus, I think we're on like version 50 or something like that. So yeah, I think you're covered. But this is the web address that you would use to get to the new school edition. It's more like a service now rather than, say, like a web page like the other one is. And so it's a much more intuitive and fluid interface, and it is interoperable with all browsers. So you don't have to worry about Chrome not working or having to use Firefox. A lot of libraries have moved over to this version, even if they have to go back and maybe do a report in the old one every once in a while. All the activity reports that you would usually run are available in this, and there's a couple. The more popular reports are still available in this new one. So let's go over there and I'll show you how this works. So this is the new version of Web Management Reports, and it's been out since 2007, so it's not really that new. So what you have available here, it's a little different in terms of how it's set up. You have the ability to create reports for all circulation activity, which we just looked at. You have your circulation crosstabs. Again, we looked at those. Checkouts we looked at, and patrons we have not. But that's another report that's available. So you can create those reports. You also have the ability to go back. There's a Create tab here at the top, but there's also a Review tab. And if you click on that, what that will bring up, I have to log in here. It's again your Sierra. And you'll notice you get these non-secure messages. They're working on that. It's a real issue of stress among all the libraries that use Innovative is we're really kind of focusing on getting all these secured sites in place. Their technology is a little bit behind in terms of their security. I think their desktop clients are fine. It's the web apps and web things that they just haven't updated yet, but those are apparently in the works to be updated so that you won't see this and you'll have a secured connection immediately upon entering the reports area for both of them. Okay, so, I'm going to use Lori as an example. She ran an all circ activity report yesterday, sorted by stack group. That's a pretty typical one. So she's trying to get information for her branch and just seeing what circ activity looked like for yesterday. Same with Brett, Jill, who's a director at Oak Creek, probably looking at all circ activity for her library as well. But the problem with this is that once you get up to about 300 or so of these reports, they won't allow you to create any more. So if you ever come across that, just nudge me a little bit and say, hey, maybe it's time to delete these. We're trying to get people to delete them on their own, but I know that this is not something, it's like you forget about the fact that these are actually sitting here. And I've actually gone through, I'm trying to get in the habit of deleting these at the same time I'm working with Create Lists so that they're done either on a monthly or quarterly basis, that we're paring these down to maybe like the last couple months. Because most people they run the report, get their data, and then they forget about it. So in this case, if you do run a report and you remember, please delete them. Otherwise, don't worry too much about it. We'll get to them. So back to the create area here. Let's just do a real simple all circulation activity report. So in this case, what you do is you take your mouse, click on the button or the area for all circ activity. But instead of having this huge amount of data that you have to wade through in terms of setting up the report, it again goes kind of in a flow chart method, but this time it just gives you the screens one by one. So it's a lot easier to set up. So if we can set our date for month to date again, sort by stack group, or we could do the same limits that we did before in the other report. We're just going to let this go. The difference here is that it will not load in the screen. It will create an Excel file, and then you will view that Excel file on your PC. It takes a little bit of time. What's nice about the All Circ report is that it does provide you not only with the raw data, but it does provide those charts that we saw in the other version. So it will provide like a bar chart or a pie chart, depending on the type of report that's run. Okay. So while this is running, let me just give you a little bit more information about this, this particular interface. Some reports, like the checkout report that we're going to look at. Okay, let's move on. Let's just use this. Okay, so this is what it usually looks like. It says open with Microsoft Excel, the default. I click OK. And it automatically, okay. So I usually would probably enable editing in this case because I'm going to work with the data probably anyway. And enable content because you usually have some security warning come up. So you just click on the buttons on the yellow areas and then you're fine. I have to do that for a lot of stuff these days. So this is a really nice report that you've just created here. The table version comes out. It's got nice header and columns, you know, column headers available here. It's just the same information. You have a chart now. This is your bar chart. And what this does, and it's kind of hard to see here on the screen, but it has a segmented bars so that your check-ins and your checkouts are represented in the entire total. So if you go down the list here, you'll see that the checkouts and check-ins are represented by separate color schemes. So 0 down here at the very bottom is all holds. So it's at 5941. And then if you go down to the summary chart, again, this is just breaking out those categories: checkouts, check-ins, holds, and recalls for the time period. And then the raw data is just exactly the same stuff we saw with the other report system or interface. All your numbers are available here. So all activity is a little different than some of these other reports, but it creates it all for you on the fly and then just presents it to you within an Excel file that you can just save. So it's a much, much easier, I think, version to work with. Okay. So obviously, if you wanted to do more than this, do month-to-date stack group, you could do a limit and then choose all locations, a particular stack group, an item location, or hour, just like the other report did. So if we wanted to limit it to a certain stack group, then it populates this number, so we could do our east search again. Report it by p-type. Do the same report. Hopefully it won't take quite as long. What I was going to say about the checkout report, and we'll look at that in a sec, is that it does provide more information and compares data to the previous month. So it'll give you this month's data that you're looking at, compares it to the previous month, and then the same month from the previous year. So it's got those columns in addition to everything else that you're going to get. Okay. Any questions so far while we're waiting for this? Gives you a sense about how long it takes for the reports to actually run.
What was about the checkout report again?
Yeah, so the checkout report is different from these other ones in that it compares data from, say you're looking at January, it will have data from the previous month. So January looking at December, of a column for December, and then for January of 2017 from the previous year. So it'll have additional columns for you to look at versus just the raw data for the current month. Okay, so this is going to take a while. I'm going to move over something that's kind of like not on the agenda, but I wanted to show you the dashboard. If you haven't seen that already, it's a neat site that we started using a couple of years ago. Oh, okay. So I guess we'll not do that. We will open this up with Excel first. Okay. So again, this is just looking at, it's kind of hard to see here, but stack groups 131, 132, the table, you know, the circulation activity chart is really small. Let's see if I can make this bigger here. So this just gives you an idea of who's using the library for this time period at East. Summary chart, again, broken down, but just looking at East for both checkouts, check-ins, and holds. And then the raw data. So it just gives you an idea. You can get the same report but drilling it down a little bit further. I'm just going to exit out of there. Okay. So let's go back one step. I want to just show you the checkout report. Obviously, you have the circulation crosstabs. These take forever. If you thought these reports took a long time, the circ crosstabs will take a long time. But again, if you have no other choice but to get data from there, that's the only option you have. You can still use those. Let's do just an example of the checkouts report. So we can choose yesterday, just kind of keeping it low data. Looking at all locations, we can pull out one location served or just look at all of them all together. Let's look at just one only, and then this, you can kind of see how these things work. Before we had to look at the frame to make this selection, but it comes up automatically. Let's just choose South Milwaukee as our example here, then click on Submit. And we'll show you those additional columns. Have you guys used the dashboard before, or have you looked at that? Okay. I think you'll find it more useful. That's the word I'm looking for. So this is the dashboard. Its location is dashboard.mcfls.org, and it's got a lot of the same types of statistics, but you can drill down a bit more. Now, let's just open this up first. Boy, every time I start talking about the dashboard, I get interrupted. Okay, so what are we looking at here? Okay. Oh, I think we have to, yeah, that's what happened. Got to enable the content to look at all this stuff. Yeah, this is a checkout report for yesterday for South Milwaukee, and this is looking at South Milwaukee items and how they're checked out and by who. So adult South Milwaukee checked out 342 of South Milwaukee items. I guess that's the way you could look at this. See if we can get the raw data appear here. Now these checkout statistics, I think it's because we only chose one day to look at. While we're talking about the dashboard, I'll run another report real quick so we can look at that. Let's see, last month. Okay. So while that's running, we'll just talk about the dashboard for a bit. This is where we think the future is going. Right now, we're using kind of a, not proprietary, it's like an in-house piece of software that interacts with a database that we've set up off of Sierra. So we're pulling out information from Sierra overnight, every night, for things like mostly circulation related, but also SAM sessions, new patrons, new items. Each month we update it with Overdrive circulation and RB Digital circulation. For Milwaukee, it's not divided up by branch. So Milwaukee's all kind of collected when it comes to Overdrive and RB Digital, but every other piece of information is generally separated by branch. Okay, so we're going to open up this checkout report and see what we're looking at here. Okay, table, circulation statistics. Okay, and this is where you see, because we're looking at a month, we're looking at January of 2018 is our base data, and it's got December of 2017 and January of 2017, looking at the month previous and then last year month over month. And it gives you the percentage change, increase, decrease, and then the raw numbers in the final two columns. So it's useful, I think, to see trends that way. And I guess this is only available because we're doing a month, like looking at a last month or a month to date type search. So it's interesting to see how some of these numbers are going to be vastly different. Just, you know, especially if you have like one or very small numbers from one community, you could have like a 200% increase or decrease. So it's not as useful perhaps, but looking at your own community, it might be useful. Like the South Milwaukee CERC was down a little bit from last year at the same time, but was actually up quite a bit over the previous month in December 2017. So just useful information to look at. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard. I want to just show you how this works. There's a summary screen that shows you the entire system CERC. And again, with the dashboard, I kind of mentioned this before, we've split out checkouts and from renewals, so you can look at those two data points separately for each location if you wanted to, and for a specific time period. If you can actually limit it to a specific location from this drop down, you could look at all Milwaukee if you wanted to, or specific branches. The suburban libraries are also identified here. So if we did South Milwaukee for January, it will update these charts and show you how your CERC is done for the past 12 months. The summary table here off to the left, you see these numbers next to each. That is your rank for that time period as compared to the other libraries within the system, other locations. MPL branches are also represented here. As you can see, some of these numbers are into the 20s, 19, all that stuff. So if it says 0, it doesn't mean you don't have anything going. It just doesn't, it means that we're not measuring it. So I think South Milwaukee has EnvisionWare, or what do you guys have for public?
Yeah.
So, and we haven't done an EnvisionWare load yet. That's automated. So we just don't have that information for South Milwaukee. But a lot of this other stuff we do, like Meraki Wireless, Overdrive CERC for that period, and RB Digital.
What's the Meraki wireless? Is that just how many people are using our wireless?
Yeah, and that number is always inflated because it doesn't really measure data transmission. It's just connections. So if you have your cell phone on and you walk through South Milwaukee Library and you've done it before, you've connected before, that's all it's measuring. It doesn't really measure data transmission over a certain amount or anything like that. So, but all this stuff you can drill down. So we're looking at South Milwaukee. You could go into Sierra, looking at in-building CERC. So this would be the equivalent of that all activity report. In-building CERC, meaning CERC across your desk. So we've got total circulation, which includes checkouts and renewals, broken down by format, by age of the patron. We have checkouts separated from that. So just checkouts, again, by day, source, format, age. Renewals, same thing. And then we do have a section here for filled holds, which is very similar to that other report that we looked at. So who is checking out materials from your library? Filled holds by residence, filled holds by format. It's the same data point. So it has to be a hold that's been requested and filled at South Milwaukee and checked out by a patron. So it's not just stuff sitting on your hold shelf. It's just it has to be checked out. Let's see. And that's the big one. Then you have collection circ, so that's, again, that checkout report, it's equivalent to that. You'll notice the numbers are a bit different, not a ton, but for whatever reason, some of the numbers don't get translated correctly. They may be off by 10 or 20 or something like that, especially for a longer period of time. But we're taking their data directly from Sierra, so I'm not sure where their numbers are coming from for their reports. But for our annual reporting, we use whatever is in the web management reports. But for your day-to-day, trying to view trends, this is a lot more helpful, we think. We also have Sierra cataloging, so that would be like new items, items added. This is looking at South Milwaukee, and for January, what items they added and what locations was it associated with. And then we have new patrons as well. So this is all in like this big Mongo database. It's hilarious, these names they come up with. But it's not Mongo is a database, but it's unlike any other database you've ever seen if you've ever looked at like a database with columns and rows for tables. It's documents, and it's so weird. It took me months to get used to how it worked.
It's nice how quickly the information populates.
Yeah, it's because we've loaded it up with lots of RAM on the web server that's sitting in the other room there, so that helps. E-content is the overdrive, RB digital information, RB digital magazines, and you can kind of get a sense about, what they're borrowing, National Geographic, all that stuff we load. I have to load manually every month, the first of the month. It's not a big deal. I can't automate it. I have to wait for the file to come in, and then I have to run a quick line to load up all the data that it comes with it. So it's like maybe 3,000 or so lines every month. But I got everything automated until up to that point. So I'm good. SAM computer use, we don't have anything there, but the wireless sessions, it kind of breaks it down. So there's a lot more here than just circ. We're trying to make this kind of like a one-stop shop, and there are other items we're trying to add to it. I just haven't had the time. The owning home report, I'm trying to get into this group, but that's proving to be a little bit more complicated than I expected. But you can break this down. You can also break this down by calendar. So if you wanted to look at the last 30 days, the last 7 days, you can also do a custom range. So if you wanted to just do, let's say, February 3rd through the 9th, I can do apply, and then look at my Sierra circ, for example. And I can get that information. So that's granularity you will not be able to get in web management reports. So I don't have anything else to present on. I know we're kind of up against it for time. I did want to go over some of these exercises, just to kind of make sure you're paying attention. Maybe let's just do a couple of these. We talked about some of these that were interesting, but let's go back and kind of reset things a bit. So we're going to look at these online too. I'll just kind of bring these up. So one of the questions that always comes up is, how would I find my in-building circulation numbers for January 2018? Is there any ideas here within the group as to which report you would use to run that and get that information?
I would start with the dashboard.
Okay, you could use the dashboard, sure. All right, and then while we're actually looking at it, so it's in-building circ.
Yeah.
So you would just do last month. There you go. So you got your information there for just using South Milwaukee as an example. Go ahead.
How far can I go back?
I believe we go back to like 2016. If you can go back as far as you want, we just don't have data. It's like the calendar's there, but it won't show anything. If you had to run it using these old school reports, which report do you think you would run for that? To find your in-building circ. Yes.
Which one was it?
All activity.
All activity. Yep. And again, this is all activity measures circ coming across your desk or your in-building circ. So that's definitely what that would be. So in this case, we do all activity. Last month is an option. And we just do it by terminal group. We could just use that, no problem. So we're looking at January 2018. And if we use South Milwaukee as our example, it looks like we have 13,113 circs. Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. That's a report you're almost always going to use, either using the dashboard or web management reports. You're always going to usually find some use for the all activity report. And we go back here. What report would I use to schedule staffing? How would you alter staffing based on numbers from January? Yes. I think I talked about that way too much. And that's the report we don't have in the dashboard. So that's something you really have to use within web management reports, especially this version of it. It's really the only one available. So if we looked at January, let's just use that as an example. Use South Milwaukee since you're here, Emily.
What's that?
We use South Milwaukee's hourly report.
Oh, okay.
So I guess I wouldn't know, using the day by hour report, I probably wouldn't use that as much as it would the total by day of the week, like how your Mondays look versus, like your Wednesdays or something like that. Are you more busy during certain times of the day? I can see you've got some peak hour times here at what would this be, like 1 o'clock? No, 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock on Wednesdays, maybe you have a lot of school-age students coming in. You can see that kind of peaks. So you may want to have more staff on hand during that time. So, yep, exactly.
That's nice for evenings too.
Yeah.
You can see how late should we stay open.
Exactly. Right, right. Now, one thing to be aware of, and I did mention this before, is this number for all activity also includes renewals. So you'll see when it was just, this is going back a ways, but the way it works now with renewals is before we used to have to run a separate report and assign circulations to libraries based on some kind of formula, some weird formula that I hated it. What happens now is when you renew an item, the renewal goes back to the original checkout stack group. So if you checked out a book from South Milwaukee, let's say in January, and just renewed it, that statistical number goes back to South Milwaukee stack group. So if you checked it out from 122 in January, you renewed it, that number gets attributed back to 122 in February, whenever the renewal takes place. No matter exactly. If you were on the Webpack or you were on Encore or sitting, had somebody from East renew it for you, that number goes back to South Milwaukee. So that's kind of a big deal. And the reason I came up here is because you'll notice these numbers for renewals are coming up at like 11 p.m. See 3 here on the 21st of January. You guys aren't open. People are at home. And when we didn't do that, you could see these numbers were clean zeros. So when you're doing your staffing and your hourly things, you kind of have to take into account there's some renewals going on here. So it's not just strictly checkouts, but the numbers are good enough to allow you to make some determinations that way. Sorry, I didn't mention. I'll make sure I mention that in the next training session I do with this. So that's an important part. Let's see here. let's just do one more since we're kind of running up against it. Where would I find circulation of all my items across the system for 2017? You could do that. However, it wouldn't be specific to your collection enough, I don't think. Yeah, checkout report. So that's just looking at your own collection. We could look at user specified for the date range, and that will give you the option to choose a beginning and ending month. So if we look at one only, so this will give us, so when we do user specified for the dates, it gives you the option to choose a start and end month. So if we wanted to just look at all of 17, you check January and December, click on Submit Query, and then choose the location served. You know, in this case, we could have used the system, but you're probably going to want to look at your own library circ. I'll choose South Milwaukee again. And again, so this is all of your circulation for 2017 and separated out by patron type. And it's interesting to note that those percentages kind of fall in line with what last month's circ looked like, or year to date, or I'm sorry, month to date for February looked like. So that you're at like 10.2% for February of this month, you know, for this month, and then for all of last year it was pretty much the same breakdown. You're not going to see too much variation unless you've got, you know, something weird going on. But, and then your adult South Milwaukee circ was 51%, which is pretty much in line with the other reports we've looked at. So gives you an idea of what, you know, who's using your library, and using your collection. Okay, I think we're done with exercises. We're done here. Any questions you guys have for me? I know it's a lot of information to look at. Hopefully some of this was interesting and at least gives you somewhere to go to. Yeah, get to start with. Dashboard is really good. I'd suggest using that first for most of your needs, and you can look at trends that way. You can export some of the data also from Dashboard. It's not something I've really talked about too much. But if you look underneath each chart, if you mouse over it, you can actually export the data. There's a little X next to it. I think you can do it here. And then click to save file, and whatever's in that table, you can actually export and open up in Excel.
So it kind of seems like if I have a question I need answered, I may start with the dashboard.
Right.
And if it's not giving me what I want,
Yep.
then I go to the web management reports, the new version.
Yep, yep. And kind of work your way backwards in time.
Total desperation,
like,
go to the old version.
Yeah, right, exactly. Especially if you need the hourly report, just start with the old version. You're better off that way.
Better in the old school?
Yeah, it's better. That one is better in the old school. I'm not even sure if it's available in the new version. I think you can do some kind of hourly report, but it's not nearly as simple. It's actually simpler to use it in the old school version. So
is that like the only time you would start with the old school version?
yeah, that's the only one. All activity definitely would use the new school. Checkouts definitely use the new school. Everything else you can look for in Dashboard. See if it's available there. And if you're still having problems, I can run reports off of, because in addition to having this data for the dashboard in a separate database, I actually have another database that runs Sierra Circ every night, kind of in parallel to Mongo, so I can run reports off of that. So I have reports. It's very anonymized for the patrons, so I don't really keep any patron identifying information. But we do have some circ information for, you know, specific reports you want to run for your branch, like by format for, you know, a branch or suburban library. So we can run reports, special reports for that too. So if you're not finding something, don't despair. We can usually get something. Okay, well, I'm going to see if there's any questions on the live. This is going to be kind of weird. with me. You're probably going to see me in like a... Okay, I don't see anyone up on here, so we're not going to worry about it. Okay. All right. Well, that is it. Thank you very much. Yep. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. If any questions, just let me know. You know where I work. You know where the offices are. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
You bet.